I caught my best friend sleeping with my girlfriend, then he attacked me. But I made them both regret it. Their lives fell apart, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. I used to think my life was solid. Not perfect, but secure. I had a good job, a girlfriend I adored, and a best friend I trusted like a brother. It wasn't the kind of life that made headlines, but it was mine, and I was happy with it. Or at least, I thought I was. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. How I ignored the little details, brushed off the subtle changes, convinced myself that the woman I loved and the guy I had known since high school would never betray me. But they did. And when I finally uncovered the truth, it didn't just destroy me, it nearly got me killed. The first cracks were small. Easy to dismiss. My girlfriend, Natalie, started acting different. It wasn't obvious at first. Just little things. She'd cancel plans last minute, saying she was too tired, or had to work late. I believed her because why wouldn't I? But then she started dressing up on those work nights, makeup done, hair perfect, wearing that one perfume she only used for special occasions. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then there was Jason, my best friend. My closest friend. The guy who had been in my life since we were teenagers, who had crashed on my couch when his ex kicked him out, who I had backed up in every fight, no matter how stupid. Suddenly, he wasn't around as much. He'd dodge my calls, cancel our weekend plans. When we did hang out, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, always making sure it was face down on the table. Again, I ignored it. Because I trusted them both. But trust only lasts until the first real crack shatters everything. And my first real crack came one night when Natalie left her phone on the counter. She was in the shower, and I was making us dinner. It buzzed once. Then again. A third time, like whoever was texting her really wanted to get through. I glanced at the screen. Jason's name. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. But something felt wrong. I had never been the jealous type, never the guy who snooped, but something told me that this wasn't just a friendly conversation. I picked up her phone. The messages were deleted. Every single one of them. I stood there, staring at that empty chat log, my pulse hammering in my ears. Natalie had never deleted messages before. Not from me, not from her friends. Why would she delete them from Jason? My stomach twisted. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I placed the phone back where it was and forced myself to act normal when she came out of the shower. I watched her smile at me, watched her lean in and kiss me, watched her eat dinner like nothing was wrong. And the entire time, one thought screamed through my head. Something is going on. And I need to find out what. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I wanted to believe it was nothing, to chalk it up to paranoia, to stress, to anything other than the possibility that my best friend and my girlfriend were hiding something from me. But that gut feeling wouldn't go away. So I started watching. Not in a creepy, obsessive way. I didn't go through her phone again, didn't demand answers. Instead, I just paid attention. And the signs were there. Natalie started guarding her phone more than usual. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd tilt the screen away. She started setting it face down, just like Jason always did. She even turned off notifications when we were together, something she had never done before. And then there were the excuses. One night, she told me she was staying late at work again. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but my gut told me to check something, anything. I knew the route she took home. I knew how long it usually took. But that night, she came back almost an hour later than she should have. No explanation. No mention of anything unusual. Just a casual kiss on the cheek before heading to the shower. I sat there, staring at the wall, feeling my stomach churn. I was starting to see it clearly now, the effort she was making to cover her tracks. Then there was Jason. He was acting just as strange. He started canceling our usual plans, saying he was busy with work or just too tired. But his car wasn't parked outside his apartment like it normally was on those nights. Both of them had patterns, familiar routines I had never thought to question before. Now, I was seeing the gaps. The missing time. The inconsistencies. But I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. That night, as Natalie slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The pieces were all there, scattered and disconnected, but the truth hadn't fully taken shape yet. I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly what was going on. And I wasn't sure I was ready for it. That I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Jason and Natalie together, laughing behind my back, whispering to each other, planning their next lie while I sat there like a fool, still believing in them. But I wasn't going to be a fool anymore. The next day, I started digging. I went through old photos on social media, scrolling through posts that seemed harmless at the time. But now, I was looking for something different, little signs I had missed before. And they were there. Natalie and Jason had always been friendly, why wouldn't they be? He was my best friend, after all. But now that I was really looking, I saw it. In group photos, she was always standing next to him, even when I was in the picture. At parties, her body was always tilted slightly toward him, like she was drawn to him. And Jason? He was always smiling at her in a way that felt too familiar. I checked timestamps. Their likes and comments lined up almost perfectly. When she posted a selfie, he liked it within minutes. When he posted something stupid and meaningless, she was always the first to respond. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see. But I wasn't convinced. So I went further. I checked my phone bill. Natalie and I shared an account, which meant I could see her call and text history. She wasn't texting Jason often, at least, not in a way that seemed out of the ordinary. But then I saw the pattern. She was calling him late at night. Always after midnight. Always when I was asleep. Not every night, but enough to make my stomach turn. I clenched my jaw so tight it hurt. They were careful. They were smart about covering their tracks. But not smart enough. I still didn't have proof. But I was getting closer. I just needed to catch them in the act. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. The truth was right there, circling me like a shark in dark water. I could feel it, see it in the little gaps in their stories, in the carefully deleted messages, in the way my own instincts screamed at me that something was wrong. But I still needed undeniable proof. So I set a trap. That Friday, I told Natalie I had to work late. I made sure to mention it casually over breakfast, throwing in a sigh about how I'd probably be stuck at the office until after midnight. She barely reacted, just nodded, told me not to overwork myself, and kissed me goodbye like nothing was wrong. Jason, meanwhile, sent a single text that afternoon. Weekend plans? I told him I was busy. And then I waited. I didn't go to work. Instead, I parked my car a few blocks from our apartment and waited. Hours passed. The sky darkened. My pulse was a slow, steady drumbeat in my ears. I told myself I was being crazy, paranoid, jealous. But then, just after 10 p.m., Natalie left. She didn't text me, didn't call, didn't even make up an excuse. She just got dressed up, did her makeup, and walked out the door like I didn't exist. I followed her. At first, she drove aimlessly, like she was checking to make sure she wasn't being followed. But I was patient. I knew her driving patterns. I knew she'd let her guard down eventually. And she did. She pulled into a parking lot, a hotel parking lot. And waiting there, leaning casually against his car like he had all the time in the world, was Jason. My chest tightened. My hands clenched around the steering wheel. This was it. They greeted each other like a couple meeting for a date, quick smiles, a touch on the arm that lasted a second too long. Then, without hesitation, they walked inside together. I sat there, staring at the hotel entrance, my whole body frozen. I had known. I had suspected, dug for clues, pieced together the lies, but actually seeing it was different. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was real. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were clenched so tight that my nails dug into my palms, but I barely felt the pain. The anger, the pure humiliation, burned hotter than anything else. This was it. The undeniable proof. The worst-case scenario playing out right in front of me. I got out of my car. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second-guess. I marched across the parking lot, through the hotel doors, straight to the front desk. My voice was calm, too calm, as I asked which room Jason had just checked into. The receptionist hesitated, eyeing me carefully. I must have looked crazy, a man barely holding himself together, rage barely contained beneath the surface. But when I slid a crisp $50 bill across the counter, she barely hesitated before typing into her computer. Room 214. I took the stairs 2 at a time. My vision tunneled. My breath was sharp, ragged. The hallway stretched ahead of me, every door looking the same, until I stopped in front of the one. 214. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I kicked the door open. Jason was standing near the bed, his shirt halfway unbuttoned. Natalie was sitting on the edge, laughing at something he had just said, laughing, until the door flew open, slamming against the wall with a crack loud enough to shake the room. Their heads snapped toward me. I'll never forget the look on their faces. Natalie's shock, her eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like she had been caught doing something as innocent as stealing a cookie from the jar. Like she hadn't just destroyed everything. And Jason? Jason smirked. The bastard actually smirked. Like he had been waiting for this moment. Like he had won. Something inside me snapped. I lunged at him. I don't even remember throwing the first punch, only the feeling of pure satisfaction when my knuckles met his jaw. Jason staggered back, his smirk gone. But he was bigger than me, stronger, and the moment of satisfaction was short-lived. Because then, he hit back. Hard. Pain exploded across my face. My vision blurred. Before I could recover, he grabbed me by the collar, slammed me against the wall, and drove his fist into my ribs. Natalie did nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't try to stop him. She just watched. Jason shoved me to the ground, breathing heavily. He looked down at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Amusement. He was enjoying this. I was bleeding, gasping for breath, my vision swimming, but all I could focus on was the way he smiled before saying something I'll never forget. Something that made my rage burn hotter than the pain. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The impact of Jason's attack had left me dazed, my body aching, but more than the physical pain, it was the humiliation that hit hardest. I had walked into that room expecting regret, maybe an apology, maybe guilt, but instead, I had been met with mockery, with a complete lack of remorse. As I lay on the floor, struggling to push myself up, Jason stood over me, radiating triumph. He wasn't just reacting, he had enjoyed this, enjoyed proving his dominance, like winning this fight somehow justified what he had done. And Natalie? She hadn't stepped in. Hadn't even flinched. She had just watched, her expression unreadable, neither stopping him nor offering any kind of support to me. That, more than anything, solidified what I had already known, they were in this together. But even as Jason stood there, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to lash out again, something inside me shifted. I didn't need to fight him. I didn't need to win in that way. Because Jason thought power came from force. From being the one left standing. But real power? Real power came from knowing when to walk away. I exhaled slowly, my mind clearing. The anger was still there, burning beneath the surface, but I controlled it now. I refused to let him dictate how this would end. Without a word, I steadied myself, pushed off the floor, and stood up. I saw Jason tense, bracing for another swing, but I wasn't going to give him one. Instead, I met his eyes for a long moment. Then, I turned and walked out of the room. I heard him say something behind me, but I didn't care enough to listen. His words meant nothing to me now. This fight was over. But the real battle? That was just beginning. I left the hotel feeling strangely calm. Not at peace, not yet, but no longer spiraling in rage. Jason and Natalie had shown me exactly who they were. They had betrayed me, lied to me, humiliated me. But I wasn't the loser here. They were. Because Jason had proven that he had nothing beyond his ability to push people down, and Natalie had made her choice, standing silently by the side of someone who had just proven exactly what kind of person he was. I had spent too much time being angry. Too much time obsessing over the betrayal. But walking away from them, I felt something shift. The need for revenge wasn't controlling me anymore. Instead, I had something better. Clarity. Jason had built his life on image, on being the guy everyone admired, the friend everyone wanted, the man who could do no wrong. He had always gotten away with things because people trusted him. That trust was about to disappear. Natalie had thrived on perception, on looking like the perfect girlfriend, the loyal and sweet partner. She had always been able to twist things in her favor. That illusion was about to shatter. I didn't need violence. I just needed the truth. And now, I was going to make sure everyone knew it. The silence from Jason and Natalie didn't last long. By the next morning, the damage had fully set in, and they were scrambling to put out the flames. I woke up to a flood of missed calls. Jason had called repeatedly, back to back, as if sheer persistence could undo what had happened. Natalie had called even more, each attempt a desperate plea for attention. The voicemails sat untouched. I already knew what they contained, excuses, justifications, fake remorse, but none of it mattered now. The messages were relentless. At first, Jason was furious, blaming me for everything, spitting out insults like a wounded animal lashing out. But as the reality of his situation sank in, the tone changed. His words became defensive, an attempt to rewrite history, to minimize what he had done. He painted it as a mistake, an accident, something that hadn't really mattered. But I knew better. He had laughed in my face, beaten me to the ground, and now that the consequences were here, he wanted to pretend it was all just a misunderstanding. Natalie's messages were different. She leaned on emotional manipulation, twisting the situation as if I was being unreasonable, as if I was overreacting. She wanted to talk, to meet, to explain. But she had already made her choices. She had already stood by and watched when Jason attacked me. And now, she was the one begging for understanding. I ignored them both. While their worlds fell apart, I went about my day. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was something colder, something final. Jason's job had been the first thing to crumble. His company put him on indefinite leave, pending an internal review. A career built on confidence and charm had no place for someone whose name was now attached to betrayal and violence. One of his co-workers reached out privately, confirming what I had already expected. Jason wasn't just losing respect, he was losing everything. Natalie's situation unraveled just as fast. Her family found out, and for once, her usual tactics of playing the victim weren't working. She had spent years bending the truth to fit whatever narrative suited her best, but this time, there was no room for deception. Even those closest to her saw through the act. She was left scrambling, trying to regain control, but there was nothing left to salvage. That evening, the inevitable happened. A knock at my door. Jason stood outside, his expression dark, eyes wild with desperation and anger. He had lost control, and he knew it. He looked like a man who had gambled everything and watched it all burn to the ground. He spoke, his words sharp, full of resentment, full of rage. He blamed me. He called me a coward. He accused me of ruining his life over something meaningless. But even in his fury, he couldn't bring himself to say what mattered most. He couldn't admit that he had done this to himself. He couldn't say, "I destroyed my own life." I watched him unravel. Then, without a word, I shut the door in his face. And I locked it. For good. Even after I shut the door on Jason, his presence lingered. His footsteps didn't immediately fade, and I could hear his heavy breathing on the other side. He was waiting, hoping that I would open the door again, that I would give him some reaction, anything that meant he still had control over the situation. But I gave him nothing. After a while, he left. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. The weight on my chest had lessened, the anger in my veins no longer boiling over. The damage was done, and I had nothing left to say. But that didn't mean they were finished. Natalie tried again a few days later. Without my responses, she turned to social media, making vague posts that painted her as the victim. She never mentioned me directly, never named Jason, but the intention was obvious. She wanted people to wonder, to ask questions, to believe that she had been wronged instead of the other way around. Some people fell for it. Others didn't. Mutual friends reached out, some cautiously, some outright disgusted with her. It didn't take long for the truth to spread, for people to connect the dots. Her attempt at damage control only made her look worse. Jason, on the other hand, disappeared. After losing his job, he cut contact with almost everyone. No one knew where he had gone, and no one really cared to find out. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fast things could fall apart when someone thought they were untouchable. But even as the dust settled, I felt restless. The betrayal still echoed in my mind, no matter how much distance I put between myself and them. I had spent so long being angry, so long wanting revenge, that now, without them in my life, I didn't know what came next. Healing wasn't as simple as shutting a door. It was waking up to silence where there used to be constant messages. It was unlearning habits, undoing years of trust that had been shattered in a matter of months. It was realizing that the people I had once considered family had never really been that at all. I wasn't sure what moving on looked like. But I knew one thing for certain. I was never going to let something like this happen again. The chaos had settled, but the scars remained. Not the bruises, those had faded. It was the deeper wounds that lingered. The ones that didn't show in the mirror but made themselves known in quiet moments, in the silence where there used to be trust. Jason and Natalie were gone from my life, but their betrayal had left its mark. Some mutual friends had stuck around, but things weren't the same. Conversations felt different, like everyone was waiting for me to bring it up, waiting to see if I was still carrying the weight of it. Others had cut ties completely, either because they had been too close to Jason and Natalie, or because they just didn't want to pick sides. I didn't blame them. What surprised me most was how quickly they moved on. For me, this had been everything, a complete upheaval of my reality, a betrayal that had rewritten the way I saw my past. But for the rest of the world, it was just another scandal, another bit of drama that would eventually be replaced by something new. That was the hardest part to accept. I had spent weeks consumed by anger, by the need to make them pay. And I had. Their lives had been turned upside down, their reputations shattered, their safety nets ripped away. Jason had disappeared, probably trying to rebuild somewhere new, where no one knew the truth about what he had done. Natalie was drowning in her own lies, trying and failing to convince people that she wasn't the person they now saw her as. I had won. But winning didn't bring peace. For a while, I kept expecting the rage to come back, for the bitterness to flare up whenever I thought about them. But instead, something else took its place. Indifference. The realization hit me one morning when I scrolled past a photo from an old trip, a picture of Jason, grinning at the camera, his arm casually draped over my shoulder. A few months ago, seeing that would have made my blood boil. But now, nothing. I deleted it without a second thought. They were just ghosts now, remnants of a life I had outgrown, of a past that no longer had power over me. I wasn't the same person I had been before this. I was sharper, colder, more careful with my trust. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The version of me who had blindly believed in loyalty, who had ignored the signs, who had let himself be played. He was gone. And I wasn't mourning him. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about regret. It was about moving forward, not as someone who had been broken, but as someone who had survived. I had walked through the fire. And now, I was finally free.